Merry Christmas, everyone, to all our family and friends across the globe, and to you listening now. This is a story about Charlie the Christmas parrot. It was going to be a challenging year at the North Pole this Christmas. All the elves were wearing little masks, keeping 6 feet apart, and frequently using candy cane scented hand sanitizer. Santa was afraid that things wouldn't be so merry, so he racked his brain, thinking up something good to keep the elves happy. Last year, Santa met a cute parrot with lime green feathers named Charlie at the red barn who sold Christmas trees. All the reindeer had been staying there. Santa patted his cherry red nose just thinking about it. He remembered that Charlie had a musical family. Maybe they could be telecasted live at the North Pole and play Christmas music and cheer up the little elves. Santa thought that having a parrot around would keep everyone entertained as well. Charlie was so excited to hear the great news of spending Christmas up at the North Pole. He could barely contain himself. It was going to be hard to be good for Santa, because he was an Amazon parrot after all. But he was going to try. A week before Christmas, Charlie and his parents arrived at the North Pole. His folks were setting up the stage. Their performance would be telecasted live on TV. They would also be on the radio all around the North Pole. Charlie was about to chew on his dad's favorite guitar when he got put back in his travel cage. Unfortunately, the elf that Charlie met last year, whose name was Alfred, was in charge of keeping Charlie out of trouble. Last year, Alfred was going to put Charlie's name on the naughty list. Fortunately for Charlie, Alfred didn't always get his way. Alfred the elf wheeled Charlie's travel cage around in a shiny red wagon and said, "Now, I'm in charge. There will be no funny business. I am needed in Santa's workshop, so that will be our first stop." "Charlie's a good boy," was all that Charlie said. Replied the disbelieving elf. Santa's workshop was a most wonderful and magical place. All the elves were working at a fast and efficient pace, but due to self-distancing and all those trips to the hand sanitizing station, they were a bit behind schedule. Charlie was so excited that the elves looked quite like the kids back home. Charlie loved kids, and most kids loved Charlie. Maybe these elves would too, so he said, "Hello."
Hello.
"Hello.
Hello.
How are you?" to all the elves. Alfred the elf realized that Charlie was stopping the workflow, so he wheeled the little red wagon into the design room and left Charlie there all by himself. Big mistake. What Alfred didn't know was that Charlie could get out of his travel cage if he tried hard enough, and believe me, Charlie was trying. After he sprung out of his cage, he flew to the computer that had been turned on and set to the toy building program. "Oh, goody, I'm going to help Santa make some new toys," Charlie thought to himself. He set to work with his beak pushing buttons and managed to change the old tried and true toy models into new ones. The only problem was Charlie didn't know much about children's toys. Still, he was very proud of himself. The new toys would become a little dolly with 3 heads, a toy truck with 2 wheels and a little teddy with one eye in the middle of his forehead. And it was later said that it would open up in a most alarming way whenever the teddy was picked up. One last button for Charlie's beak to push. Produce and complete. Charlie went back inside his cage and pretended to be asleep so he wouldn't give away the surprise. When Alfred the elf came back, he wondered why the cage door was open, but Charlie was napping, so he didn't concern himself with the matter too much. The next day, Alfred wheeled Charlie into the sweets and treats baking kitchen and left him there. He wanted to stretch out his wings, so he flew around and around the room. He flew so fast, he created a little whirlwind. The sugar that had been measured out and was ready to be put in the food processor lifted up and created a sugar snowstorm. Lemons started rolling right out of their bowl and into the food processor. Eggs were being broken. Forks and spoons and cups and saucers rattled around the kitchen as well. When Alfred and the baker elves finally came back into the room, there was one big mess. Charlie was back in the cage, pretending to nap again. Alfred the elf suspected something, and the baker elves were busy cleaning up the mess. When the head baker finally got back to making sugar cookies, he was in such a rush. He thought he had already put all the sugar in the food processor, and he didn't notice the lemons. When some of the finished cookies got back into the cookie sampling room, all the baker's elves' lips were puckered up, and the head baker elf said, "These aren't sugar cookies, these are sour cookies." For the next few days, Charlie was mostly being a good parrot and even spent some time entertaining the elves. He was singing with his parents loudly, out of tune, and didn't quite get the words right. All the elves seemed to enjoy the performances anyways. All the elves, except for maybe Alfred. Reports were getting back to him, reports of wonky-looking toys being made, and dozens of yuck, sour cookies. There was going to be a big meeting for all the elves about the upcoming Christmas Eve. It was going to be slightly different that year than the year before. There were some new regulations to follow. They were going to try and iron out some mishaps as well. Alfred believed that Charlie was the cause of some of these mishaps, and he didn't want to bring him to the meeting. Unfortunately, Charlie's parents were busy too, so the only place to take Charlie with his little red wagon was in the room where the naughty and nice list was. There was an elf there who was still working on it. Santa got talked into the list being on a computer. It was going to be easier with fewer hands touching the actual original list that had always appeared on parchment paper. Now, whatever you do, by no means let Charlie out of his cage. That was the last thing Alfred said before he left. Mistake number 3. Charlie was so excited. Here he was in the room that was actually deciding whether or not he was going to be on the nice list. "Hello," Charlie said. The elf hardly paid attention. "Charlie's a good boy." "Everyone says that," returned the elf. Charlie tried one more time. "You're beautiful." Now that had gotten the elf's attention. The little elf opened up Charlie's cage slowly. "You're a cute little fellow yourself," replied the elf. So what did Charlie do? Charlie flew out of the cage straight to the computer. He pushed buttons frantically with his beak, trying to find out which list his name was on. Unfortunately, the list started getting mixed up, and Charlie pushed the save button before the elf could get him off the computer and back into his cage. When Alfred came back, there was no mention of what happened. Santa always knows, though, doesn't he? Finally, it was Christmas Eve. Santa and the elves were ready as they could be. It was going to be a different year. The Christmas list a little longer than usual, and all the toys were packed in the sleigh. The ones that Charlie designed as well. "Let's just go with the flow on this one," Santa said. "Let's all be very merry, no matter what." All the elves agreed. Christmas Eve was the day when Mrs. Claus decorated the tree in the special sitting room she and Santa retired to on Christmas morning. Today was for making the room special for Santa, though. Mrs. Claus had pulled the boxes full of decorations out of the attic and started to decorate the sitting room. And she decorated the tree there as well. Charlie, who was being as quiet as a mouse, had gotten out of his cage again and managed to find his way into one of those boxes. What do you think happened next? Not so much, really. Charlie, being so tired from all his Christmas misadventures, flew to Santa's chair when Mrs. Claus wasn't looking and snuck under a red blanket and decided to take a real nap there himself. When Mrs. Claus finished decorating the tree, she sets out plates of mixed nuts, mandarin oranges, and cookies for them to enjoy Christmas morning. The tree looked so pretty, and she was quite pleased when she left it waiting for the arrival of Santa. It was starting to become nightfall, but the North Pole was filled with brightly colored lights that would eventually guide Santa and the reindeer home. It was a good thing, because the light shone through the window and was bright enough for Charlie to see everything in the room, but most of all, the beautiful tree. The top of the tree was left bare, so Santa could put an angel topper to signify another successful Christmas delivery of toys and goodies for all the children. When Charlie had woken up, he was full of energy and excitement, and he was also a little hungry. He was so thrilled to see a plate of nuts and Christmas oranges had been left out. After filling up on nuts and oranges, he investigated the tree. He tried opening the presents first, but the boxes were so big for him, it took a while. Afterwards, there was a mess of torn wrapping paper, bits of cardboard, and something that looked like a slipper with a chew mark on it. Charlie then decided to investigate the tree a little more and flew up high on a branch. He jiggled the tree enough that a few bubbles fell down, but they didn't break because of the cushion of shredded wrapping paper. Charlie was about to put a bite mark on a wooden toy soldier when he heard a noise. Uh-oh, somebody was opening the door.
Ho, ho, ho.
What did Charlie do then? He had to hide quickly, so he hopped on the empty spot on top of the tree and spread out his beautiful wings, pretending to be the tree topper. Maybe no one would notice. When Santa and Mrs. Claus stepped in the room, they were a little shocked. Oh my! "Oh my! Oh my!" said Mrs. Claus. They looked from the rumpled blanket on the floor to the plate of leftover nuts and orange peels to the open present and torn wrappings. Then Santa looked up on the top of the tree. He started to laugh. He laughed and he laughed until tears rolled down his eyes.
Ho, ho, ho. Oh, Charlie, you might be a Christmas parrot, but you're no angel. Ho, ho, ho.
So, girls and boys, if you didn't get what you asked for under the Christmas tree this year, or maybe you got something rather unusual, don't blame Santa. Don't blame your parents. But you just might be thinking about Charlie the Christmas Parrot.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Have a safe and wonderful, happy and healthy New Year.